Another example, I've been speaking to people that are, for example, in Canada, and
Mhm.
they're considering to play around or to adopt Copilot, but they've been told the Copilot tenants for Microsoft are either in the US or in Europe.
Mhm.
What is the risk of sending their data or their prompts across borders?
Yeah, and that's a great question when you start, especially when you start getting into the audit or the regulatory requirements, right? Especially if you look at things like GDPR or HIPAA in the US or CCPA or any of these where you have your data custodian, right? Then you have to make sure that you are not negatively impacting a customer by sending their data outside of a particular region, right? And so part of this is that Microsoft is slowly enabling Copilot in more and more of their quote unquote tenants. And when they say tenants, I think they're more referring to the data centers and things like that, right? Or
Yeah,
where you could pass over logistical or geographical bounds, right? When you're starting to connect. And so I do think that there's definitely places where not just from Canada, but from anywhere, right? They have to, that's not natively supported, that you have to be kind of careful about. Or, am I okay with potentially my data going out to a service that's hosted somewhere else? But again, you have to, that one thing to keep in mind again is that you have this idea of your local organization tenant, right? And the data from your Copilot is not going to go outside of it. Now, it may go across geographical bounds, right? But logistically, your data is still within your quote unquote tenant and should not
yeah,
be able to be accessed by anybody else. But the kind of wrinkle in that, right, is when you start getting into the regulatory requirements, right? GDPR is very specific on where data can reside, or Germany, for another example, right, is very specific on where that data can reside, or China, right? All of these different areas that may not be natively supported by Copilot, but might be able to use, you can deploy a Copilot service somewhere, right? And you could use it.
yeah,
Like you have to be careful, just like you would any other resource that you're deploying, right? You have to be kind of careful about where you're deploying your Copilot resources, and how that is going to be utilized in your organization to where that data could potentially end up or reside, even though it's still contained in your tenant, right? Where geographically, right, that data could potentially go.
yeah. And correct me if I'm drawing the wrong
Mhm.
conclusion, but it sounds like there's the word tenant is used in different scenarios. You're
Yeah.
talking there's the tenant from the consumer customer side,
Yeah.
where it's their environment they play around with, but Microsoft also calls it the tenant that has the Copilot model, which is like a black box where the prompts go in and it spits out the result. But that's
Yeah.
also called a tenant. So
Yeah.
whoever's watching needs to be aware.
Yeah.
There's two
Where
two
where that
interpretations.
black box is, right, is kind of from a Copilot perspective, right,
Yeah,
is kind of where you kind of want to make sure that you have insight into where that being stored, where is this data going, that type of thing. But yes, you're correct that sometimes you have the multiple ways to use that same phrase, right, within Microsoft. So you got to be a little bit careful.
yeah. It's funny how Microsoft does that.